Good morning and welcome to the Dental Leadership Summit podcast. I have the pleasure to introduce not one, but two speakers today. We have David James, CEO of Locate Strategy, and Brian Mills, also CEO of Rome Realty. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ralph.
Good afternoon, Ralph. How are you today, sir?
Good, good. Thanks. Thanks for making the time. Since we have two speakers, I took the liberty to write some introductions, and feel free to correct me here. So I'm going to start with David. So David, like I said, is the CEO of Locate Strategy, formerly RealScore. So you are a location analyst firm serving the dentist and healthcare practices with a market and site studies. It was founded in 2009. Is that correct, David?
Correct.
Okay, and with that, obviously, you bring decades of CPA and CFO experience to the table as well, because that's actually what you're by trade. So other than David and I, you actually have a real trade. Haha, David. Um, this reports include his reports include demographics, like deep dives into a lot of different factors, forecasting, and tools like competition ratios, patient proximity analysis. Am I doing you justice here, David?
Great. You're doing
Okay,
really
good.
well. Yeah.
Brian, all jokes aside, Brian is the founder of Rome Commercial Realty. For those of you who don't know, Brian and I have going way back. He's a really great guy. He's someone who you want to have in your court. You are a healthcare focused real estate broker. The first time I actually met him was several years ago, when he spoke at a dental event, and it's I think having insightful knowledge in a topic like real estate and making it fun and people relating to it and learning something all at the same time is what Brian is capable of doing. That's what then drove me to say hello to him and introduce myself. He's known for negotiations, dental medical side, like I said, on the real estate and commercial real estate. Um, and you're also a frequent podcast guest, and provide dental real estate strategies for his customers. Brian, welcome. Did I do you justice?
I mean, not even close. Can I take the next 30 minutes? 30 minutes to talk about myself a little bit more? Oh, that was awesome, sir. I love being here. I feel like a professional podcaster almost. I don't know. All my friends, including you, Ralph, and Ali, have podcasts these days, and
Yeah.
I've thought about doing my own, but why would I when all my best friends have them? And it's so much fun, honestly, to just get in this immediate circle and share our knowledge that we talk about all the time. I do feel like I'm competing with your background with those pictures. I feel like I need more pictures in mine, but
So
Sorry,
it's funny.
I
Is
have
like
golf
I
balls, so
I
I
realized, well, like, look, David is the one who wins, right? Like, yeah, you also have the American flag. What is that one in the middle right there? Or is
I
that a
don't know.
trophy?
This is just a bunch of shit I got off of Etsy and eBay, and I, we ran out of stuff to put places. So we're like, hey, just shove it in Dad's office, and
right.
he'll
There
do
we
something
go.
with it.
There we go. All right. So as you guys can see, uh, we have the gift of gab, and so this will not be a boring 30 minutes, 45 minutes here. David, I'm going to start with you. So for those who know me, you know that I have worked in the DSO space, the dental space, for the better part of 25 years. But I will freely admit that the real estate segment and the analytics tools around that part of the industry are not my core competency. So this is why I'm really excited to have you guys on board today for the podcast. And I want to point out that Brian and David will be at our Dental Leadership Summit in Salt Lake City at the end of October, October 23 to 25th. Shameless plug right here. David will do a in-depth breakout session talking about the things that are important, et cetera, around real estate, for these DSOs, dental practices, group practices to succeed. And and Brian with Rome will be there as well to make sure to answer questions. So I actually prepared some questions, and I worked so I sound a little smarter because I honestly wouldn't know what else to go with. So David, I'm going to start with you, um, and we're going to start with the process playbook. So walk us through the end-to-end location process you recommend, like aligning on goals, an ideal patient profile, and then running a market study. So let's start there.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. Like you said, my background is 35 years of being a CFO and CPA, and I've been in a lot of different industries. And it was really interesting to get into the dental space about 15 years ago because we realized that location is the number one factor that helps determine how successful a practice or a group or anybody's going to be. But there's no tools out there to really use data to analyze to make this process faster and less reduce risk and provide actual data instead of just driving around hoping
Yeah.
something works, right? So what we've come up with over time, we started out as RealScore and about 2 years ago rebranded and launched out as Locate Strategy. But we've been in behind the scenes for about 15 years, but now we're back, back in the public space. But what I've determined strategically, the best way to do this is, okay, we don't want to just start by driving around looking for a location and hoping it works because maybe it's a busy corner, right? What we recommend is a process. First of all, we'll sit down and have a quick conversation to understand your practice goals, what your vision is, who your ideal
Hmm.
patient would be, what kind of market are you looking at, and then using that, we quickly tailor what we would call a market study. And what we do
Okay.
with the market study is we use a process called census block groups that we'll talk about more in the summit. But long story short, there's 243,000 tiny little chunks of land that the Census Bureau breaks the country down into. We go through and analyze all of them in a
Hmm.
specific market. Like, say, for example, you want to start another practice within 30 minutes of your current one. Okay, so we would look that entire market, and usually that would encompass anywhere from 500 to 2,000 census block groups, and analyze every one of those to come up with the top 10 areas that have the best competition ratios
Yeah.
and the best high level demographics. So we do the work to figure out where's the best place to isolate the search to start narrowing down the
Yeah.
best place to execute your vision.
So David, let me ask you this then as a follow-up. So data actually moves decisions, right? So what are like the top three data sets that would shorten like a sales cycle or reduce risk for
Yeah,
folks? Like
the,
give me
the
like
sales,
give me like your top three.
sales cycle thing is really, really important because we can move the decision to really, really quickly. But the number one factor to me is competition ratios, and it's the
Okay.
hardest one out there, right? And and to get a competition ratio, you're simply taking the population in a area divided
Hmm.
by the number of practitioners in that area. Okay, and we're rolling all that up using the census block group method, and we'll explain why that's really important later. But um, so knowing your competition is more important than demographics. Okay,
Yeah.
call it 1A and 1B. But if you have terrible competition, you can have great demographics and still really, really struggle to grow.
Yeah.
Okay? So we try to isolate that first. And that is a very difficult calculation to do in this day and age, but we do the best job in the industry of making that, coming up with those numbers that reflect what their current competition is in that market. So the
Okay.
second one would be, I mean, we do deep dive demographics, but when we do the market study, we filter it by using household income. So for example, if a doctor says, I don't want any household income areas less than 75,000, we filter
Hmm.
that out immediately, right?
Hmm.
And then we also factor in population to make sure there's enough people in that market. You can have a ratio that's outstanding, but if there's only 1,000 people there,
Yeah.
not going to work, right?
Right.
So we factor those are the three main ones that we would use initially in a market
Gotcha.
study to kind of narrow down the top areas to focus, working with Brian and his team on how and to narrow down where to go.
Yeah. So Brian, follow up for you then. So you have been in the industry also for a long time, and you've seen changes and improvements and anything from markets being hot, markets cooling down. Like what are certain? Well, I have kind of two questions for you. First one is, what are like pain points that are recurring pain points that you need to help your clients overcome? And the second one is like at a very high level, are those pain points related to what's going on a macroeconomic, or is the healthcare dental care business, I'm going to say, somewhat protected from the rest of the economy?
Excuse me while I Google macroeconomics real quick.
Yeah.
No, listen, great questions. I'm gonna go back to what David said, and I
Yeah.
just started working with David probably earlier this year or late last
Okay.
year, which surprised me because I've been in the healthcare and specifically the dental space for 25 years working with dentists, and I had a whole slew of demographers, and I thought, hey, we have this figured out.
Yeah.
I took down some notes, David, while you were talking. You literally said driving around a couple times, and sometimes we roll our eyes, and but I have been pulled into. We used to be the king of startup doctors. First time startup doctors. That was kind of our jam for over a decade, and
Yeah.
we got pulled into the DSO space little by little. We
Yeah.
started working with emerging groups, multi-site practices, and then it's sort of just steamrolled. We had a lot of clients who had 5 to 10 locations, and then we had clients who had 20 to 50 locations, and then we had clients who had 50 to 100. And it's
Yeah.
shocking how many groups there are out there that have over 100 locations out there.
Yeah.
If you go to any of these DSO meetings, it's just mind blowing how many groups there are out there that you've never heard of. And then we really got catapulted into the big boy world, where we have some of the largest DSO clients in the country, actually, who have 1,000 locations, if not more.
Yeah.
And what I have found out is literally, and David, you'll probably nod your head yes on this, is whether it's your first location, your fifth location, or your 500th location, a lot of these groups are operating exactly the same way because the dental industry is very much still the wild, wild west. If you go into other verticals, other industries that we service, it's not like that. Everything is very much a franchise approach with data and analytics. But a lot of these very large DSOs have grown organically over the last less than 20 years. And they did that because they were serving a void in the market. And so
Right.
they will literally say, well, we have locations here, but we don't have locations here. Well, what's
Yeah.
driving that? Well, we're using like Placer AI, and it's showing that this many people are going into this area. And so we're just going to rinse and repeat and duplicate that. And
I
that's
kind of
not
hope for the
really a
best.
strategy for growing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just sort
Throwing
of
darts.
Yeah.
throwing
Right.
darts, organic growth. It worked one time. Why wouldn't it work the next 50 times? And now you see some of those very big DSOs, even like Starbucks did a decade ago, that are closing down dozens and dozens of locations because
True.
it worked organically, but now we're sort of cannibalizing off of our own locations that we've grown or acquired over time. So, the first thing, I don't even remember what your question is, Ralph, but the first thing you
Well,
have to do
so
is
so
back
so
up.
first, like, it's a pain point, and you kind of answered it, right? Like, is there a
Yeah.
common thread and pain points? And you kind of said it, right? Like, it doesn't really matter how big these DSOs are or group practices are. They come up against the same problems over and over and over,
Yes.
regardless of the size. So the follow up question then is I think, because you kind of went there by talking about Starbucks already. Would you see the dental industry being somewhat protected is the wrong word, but being in a different category than the rest of the economy, or is it in the exact same boat?
Oh, the dental industry, and I would say even probably the animal health space it is very insulated historically
Okay.
over time. We even saw that in 2008 and 2009
Yeah.
when home prices were just crashing and
Yeah.
the bottom was falling out for everybody. The dental industry stayed very, very steady.
Yeah.
And you've seen that through history. The worst times in the economy, the dental industry stays very steady. Now, if your entire business is based on minimally invasive veneers, you might be a little bit risky there. But if
Yeah.
you're doing, great bread and butter dentistry, restorative dentistry, you're going to survive the peaks and
Yeah.
valleys no matter what. It's where we see this, like David said, kind of throwing darts at a dartboard and seeing what sticks. That kind of very quick growth that sometimes we have to pull back from because okay, we've kind of caught this rising wave, and now we need to reevaluate our position because we've grown so fast without a strategy. So I'll give you
Right.
a good example of what I asked David to do for me, and I'll give you a little tidbit. So David is. If there's two ends of the spectrum, David is way over here on the good side, and I'm probably way over here on the bad side. I get very emotional about things, and I have to back myself up and say, okay, what do the analytics say?
Mm.
What does the data set say
Yeah.
about this? And so I have tried everything, and I kid you not, you have to have a degree in I don't know what it is, space science to understand Esri and some of these things that are out there that these multinational bazillion-dollar companies use because they literally have a room of probably 500 analysts that are looking at these things.
Yeah.
It is not applicable to the dental space in the real world scenario. And what
Oh,
David and I did over the greater part of this year was say, okay, how do we take what we're using in the individual startup space or somebody who has two, three, four, five practices and growing? That's a little bit easier. But how do we take a client who has 50 to 100 locations
yeah.
and how do we give them an easy to understand heat map, if you will, to
Yeah.
say, here's where you're at, here's where you want to go. How
Yeah.
do we look at this from a broad stroke perspective and say, where is it easy to now throw a dart and hit a bullseye versus
Gotcha.
having our eyes closed and do that? And that's what we have come up with over the last probably 6 months. And I'm super excited to unveil it at the
Show that.
summit because it
Yeah. Yeah.
allows people in the room to say, hey, I'm the CFO, I'm the CEO, I'm the growth strategy offer, and I can look at this and I can understand and digest exactly what you're telling me. And
Yeah.
we went to the market and we proved this with a group of mine personally that I paid for, I didn't tell me, that has 20 some odd locations, and they are targeting areas that once David and I did the actual heat mapping, those weren't even in the top 20
Oh, fascinating.
of the areas that they were looking for, of the
Right.
rinse and repeat to say, hey, this is the areas that we've been successful.
Yeah.
This is the demographic that's matching that. Let's go out and this is our growth. And when I presented that to them, I said, hey, listen, guys, this is not even on the top 10, let alone the top 20. David says we have to expand our data sets to even see these to show up.
Yeah.
So they're back and they're like, we're spending
Fascinating.
all of our time, wasting our time because we think these are the areas. And yes,
Yeah.
there is the population and the demographic, but in our own backyard, the top 10 is right in front of us. And that was
Fascinating.
shocking in a good way.
One thing,
Yeah. Go for it, David.
our mission with this is to bring the technology, the same technology Brian described with Esri and Buxton and places like that that cost six figures to get the access to. Our technology is the same. It's just as good as them, but it's
Yeah.
tailored to serve the dental market and to make it
Gotcha.
accessible to groups of any size without
Yeah.
having to have 15 spreadsheets and 25 different data sources they have to consolidate the data toward.
Yeah. I'm going to take total credit for finding you two and putting you on stage because this is literally the only contribution I can do to this one. Which leads me to my next question, which got like when I read this question that I have zero clue what any of this means. This is everybody get ready. CBGs versus zip codes versus rings/drive time. Okay, what the hell? Help listeners decode the geography. When should we analyze? Okay, so CBG I learned stands for census block groups, which I get, like I logically understand what this means, but I don't know how it all fits together. So give people like a little bit of an insight here of why this is important and help us talk about that, David. Because I think that this is the kind of stuff that people like me who come in and go like, look, I want to be an investor, need experts like you to decode this for us. So please shed some light.
Sure thing. We see three different ways of doing data, rolling up the data we're talking about, whether demographic data, population, whatever, rolling it up to get in for reports and analyze. The oldest one is zip codes, and those are extremely useless, frankly,
Oh,
because if you think about, if you got a particular practice at a specific location, right? They could be in a zip code that could be 20, 30-minute drive time away. It could be huge, right? We say that a typical market for a typical dentist is like, okay, what's the furthest somebody that sees your smiling face on a billboard would probably drive to you if they didn't know who you were, right?
yeah.
For most places, it's like, unless you're a specialist, 10, 12, 15 minutes, something like that.
Mm,
Okay. But a zip code, if you're getting data from a zip code, you're getting data from what area information that's way outside your market, right?
gotcha.
And also, you could be in an area where you could have three or four zip codes where your market could cut through three or four of those different boundaries. And when they give you an analysis of that, they're adding up all 4 or 5 zip codes that you might basically touch.
Yeah.
So it's useless, right? Um, for a census block group, which is what we use, and that's what the Esris and the world class people do. And like I said, the U.S. Census Bureau breaks the country down into tiny, tiny chunks. Okay, for
Okay.
example, the analysis we did for Brian, it included 9,347 census block groups with over 13 million people, right? But we're looking at every one of those 9,000 census block groups and analyzing whether it would make sense, looking at the competition and the demographics in that little tiny space, to use that as a area to go find your office or your next practice. So
Yeah.
it's incredibly precise. That is an absolute most precise way to look at data that you can get in the country. Okay, it is the absolute best. The other option you see out there is what I call concentric circles. And sometimes
Okay.
you'll see maps where, okay, say you take LA, and a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take 3 mile radius circles and they'll put them like the Olympic rings, stacking
Okay.
Olympic rings side. And usually what happens is, 6 miles in LA is an eternity, right?
Yes. I was just about to say, even 3 miles is an eternity. Dear Lord.
Long story short, in a big metro area, instead of looking at 9,000 options, you might be looking at maybe 25, 30
Gotcha.
options. So
Okay.
that's the main differences.
Gotcha. Brian, any smart answers? Because this is the one. This is the one where I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm
I'm
talking
like
about.
David's handler, right? So the guy is wicked smart. He thinks way different than I do. He's very analytical, which is great.
What we
So,
need, right?
we went through this dance several times because David's brain works different than my brain works. And what's important is that you can take the information that is so valuable, but makes it discernible to somebody sitting in the audience.
Yeah.
And that's what's really unique and I'm excited about is it takes all this. I would say the one bad thing is we have made it so easily digestible that when you look at it, you might think, oh, well, that's just overly simplified.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you hear David go off into the stratosphere and he talks about all the groups and
Right.
the people you're evaluating, and the timely data, etc., then you go, aha,
Yeah.
there's a whole thing behind the matrix here that is
Yeah.
driving this data. Because I can tell you, a lot of these groups they do have access to, different platforms and demographers and data that
Sure.
they're using, but they don't really understand it, and it's
Right.
misleading sometimes, and it's driving them in the wrong sort of strategy for growth. So
Right.
yeah, this is what's great, and listen, I have no stake in David's company whatsoever. He's just been gracious enough to work with me and say, hey, here's a void, a need in the industry. How do we bring this to the
Yes.
table so that everybody can benefit from it?
Yeah, agreed,
So
agreed. So with that said, so the next question I have is like, so this is actually something that I do know something about. So we're going to due diligence and valuations, right? And so obviously when you acquire dental practices, et cetera. So I know this from working at HR for Health, that the due diligence from an employee perspective and the valuation is obviously very, very important. But that obviously is just as important in real estate decisions, and I think this is sometimes overlooked, right? Like, so how should buyers and sellers like formally like bake in location data into a due diligence or a practice valuation? Like that must be something that is really important, right? Because I know that we on the HR side say the same thing about employees, right? Like, look, you absolutely have to do this, and it has to be part of your evaluation or your due diligence, because if it's not, the bad surprises come out on the back end. So I'm assuming that you have the same thing in that one, David.
Actually, this is something I'm really trying to champion. It's really close to my heart with my CFO background and things like that.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of everybody has their own practice valuation models, right?
Yes.
And when I came into the industry, it was kind of like, this is a little weird to me. Like, okay, you're taking 75% of collections and you're adjusting for this and this and this and this. Like, okay, but how do you really know, right? And then, and to me, when you're buying a practice, 95 really high percentage of what you're buying is the ability to retain that current patient base. That's what you're buying, right?
Amen.
You have to measure the risk of retaining that
That's right.
patient base, right? So to answer your question is, I don't see hardly anybody factoring location stuff into their valuation models, and I think it's a massive mistake. Okay.
Okay.
Because for example, let's say you got two equal practices and everything's all the same, they're the same size, they got the same equipment levels and stuff like that. But one of them is an area where the competition is outstandingly, there is not much competition. Okay, and I'm not going to get into numbers, I'll bore you to death, but let's say you got one that has no competition and one that has great competition. Okay,
Yeah.
those practice values are not even close to being the same.
Right.
Okay, because not only the cost of maintaining those patients, but the amount of marketing spend you've got to build into your budget to go and retain them and not lose them to something else, that sort of thing, right? The other thing about it, is that, again, getting back to the patients, we just
Mm-hmm.
came out with a process where we can actually evaluate where patients are located, okay, and then plot them on a drive time or a radius map and see where they're dispersed at.
Right. In relation to the to be
Right.
acquired location. I
And
got you.
because
Yeah.
to me, at the end of the day, a patient, if 25, if a patient is 25 minutes away versus a patient that's 5 minutes away,
Yeah.
that patient that's 5 minutes away is worth a lot more to you than the one that's 25 minutes away.
Sure.
Most valuation models treat them exactly the same. They assign the same value to them. So I'll talk about that more at the summit. But in a
Yeah. So
nutshell,
what you're saying essentially is like there should be some kind of a ranking and or some kind of valuation to it, and that's what we want to discuss in greater detail
exactly.
in Salt Lake. I got you. I got
Your
you.
attrition rate is much higher because what people don't
Sure.
evaluate is the easy stuff that's
Right.
smacking them right in the face. Is that,
Of course.
listen, if Ralph is my doctor and I've been seeing Ralph for 20 years, but his
Yeah.
practice looks like hell, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have any new technology, but I trust him and I've grown up with him.
Yeah.
The practice, I'm going to keep driving 25 minutes. My
Yeah.
wife takes
Right.
our kids to our beloved pediatric dentist that's over 30 minutes away.
Yeah.
But because she knows her, she trusts her, she's been going there for years. As soon as she sells that practice to somebody else that she doesn't know, she's immediately going to choose a different provider.
Totally
So
agree.
your attrition rate is much higher. I would say anybody that's traveling over 25 minutes, put them in that attrition category and
Right.
and count on losing those patients immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Agreed.
that's what's frustrating to me is that I don't think that the people doing the valuations are really taking the best interests of both either the buyer and the seller into consideration here. Because we just want to we're independent. We're like,
Yeah.
we're not taking sides. We just want to help. And, enough again. We can talk about that later, but
Yeah,
anyway,
no. But I think that this is a really important point because, and I think you just tapped on something here, David, is like people are uncomfortable talking about it because it's the God's honest truth, right?
mhm,
I mean, look, I know I'm guilty of this. Like I moved and my dentist is now 45 minutes away. So I stayed with him, wife and child were like, are you insane? I'm not driving that far. They look for a new doctor, right? And Brian, you're exactly right. The moment the guy retires or sells the practice, I'm out, right? Like
exactly.
there's no way. So yes, like that really resonates for me. Okay, so before we got started, Brian was like, look, the attention span of people listening to a podcast is like 15 minutes. We're at the 29-minute mark, but I do have a couple more questions, and I do think we're on a roll. So I'm going to keep asking them, and then people can either listen or not listen. But I do think that there's value to this. So I'm gonna capture and keep you guys a couple of minutes longer. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So the next thing is and David, we talked about this, and I think that this is also something where Brian, you really come in, is I'm talking about, so you both have talked a lot about data and the fact that this is becoming ever more important in the decision making process, but lease terms shaped by data, right? Like so give me an insight, or like translate the analytics into lease leverage. Like, again, this is something I read, I don't know what the f that means. So but tell me, right, like obviously this is important, right? Like everything you just have established and learned has to ultimately get into a contract so you get value out of it. Yes.
Absolutely. Kinda. Brian, can I give my 2 cents with it, and
Yes,
then you,
please,
the
please.
expert, you can tell
I'd
me
love to hear
whatever you
your
want.
two cents.
But to me, this is a huge thing, right? And it gets down to if you're in a current, a lot of times you got practices that are in current locations and they're either stagnant, they don't know their market, or they want to
Yeah.
grow, right? Either
Yeah.
way, let's say you're at 4 operatories and you want to get to 8, right? But you don't know your market. But let's say your market won't support going to 8, right? Then you need to make a decision. Do I stay? Do I hire an associate? Where do I have to open another office to grow? That sort of thing. And obviously, if you can't go from 4 to 8, then if your lease is up in a year and a half, you need to be talking to Brian like right now, thinking about,
Yeah.
okay, what's our strategy on our lease side? That's just one of the whole bunch of
Yes.
examples I could give you.
That's much more applicable in the real world because the contract is the contract. The negotiation is the negotiation.
Right.
We're very prideful in how hard we push on our clients' behalf, but your strategy to stay, go,
Exactly. That's where we,
grow is
yep.
all predicated on what that data looks like.
Looks like.
Clients ask me all the time, well, how do I know if I should grow? I had a gentleman that came to me very, very successful, and he had 8 or 9 operatories, and he said, I think I could double. And I said, well, that's a big matzo ball hanging out there, and I would love to help you double your practice, but I'm not in the analytics space, so we need to analyze your hygiene. How far is it booked out? What does
Yeah.
the analytics say about your practice to decide if you should go from 9 to 16 operatories or 9 to 12? Because you only want to do that move once. That's a lot of overhead. So you want to make sure that before you dive into that, that the analytics are supporting that growth strategy. How
Yeah.
big do you go? Because again, you don't want to move and be too small, and you don't want to move and all of a sudden have this gargantuan size practice. So I would say the
Yeah.
real world application, and that's a great question, Ralph. The real world application shows up in what is our strategy for growth, renewals, duplication, etc.
Gotcha.
I will say that not outside of the contractual agreements, it does matter what the demographics say in terms of location versus professional medical office building versus
Mhm.
retail, etc. Some of those play into the actual demographics.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
with all that in mind, so I'm what does a workflow then look like? What's the best cadence like for you, Brian, and Brian David, and to work with your partners, with your clients, et cetera? Is it like a weekly check-in? Like how does that work? Like, is that, give me kind of an idea of what a workflow, like a successful workflow, I should say, looks like.
Well, from
Well,
my perspective, it's sort of a kind of a one and done. Once you
Gotcha.
get that data and you satisfy those requirements, then you can move on, and this can be a living document that you add to, which is
Yeah.
great. It's probably the most time up front is that initial one, and once you get all of that, then you can
Yeah.
sort of add to it. Or as we satisfy this criteria, now we can move on to the next criteria. But it's really about for a group that's really has a growth strategy, it's about that initial conversation. What you want to do, what does your demographic look like? Once
Yeah.
we get that initial down and it's customized for them in particular, now we can add to that living document. You have too many demographers and competition companies out there that will literally say, okay, here is the platform. Now you go in and put your information in there. That is such a juvenile way to do business. You basically said, here's the app. Now you go punch in all the
Use it
data.
and
That's
pay
okay
me for it.
sometimes for a very young startup doctor, but
Okay.
anybody who's got more than 1 to 2 location and is looking to grow, you need
Yeah.
somebody that can have this onboarding process and say, okay, we understand your specific business model,
Yeah.
and how it relates to the data, and how do we go pinpoint and find that information. And
Yeah.
the cool thing is, this is not like you're spending $100,000, for
Right.
$1,000 to several $1,000s. You can have information that can guide you specifically and keep you out of a mistake that could cost you $1 million.
What I was just about to say, yeah, it's like it is the simplest way to say it is you get what you pay for, but that's oversimplifying, right? Like in the end, it's both protecting you from making a mistake and or truly open up your business to a success that you didn't think was possible
Yeah.
because you're choosing a location that really can accelerate your business.
But it is important to have the data and somebody with
Totally.
boots on the ground to understand, because sometimes we'll put a
Right.
big giant gold star in an area, and if I've worked in that area before or just a quick dive into the area, I'll say, hey, the reason that this is so attractive is because this is a city that was basically developed backwards. So a city allowed a ton of master plan communities to come in without
Uh-huh.
any commercial spaces to support them.
Uh-huh.
So everybody may be able to put a big gold star on an area, and then we have to say, well, that's because there's nowhere to actually open any type of practice or business whatsoever. So then
Gotcha.
David says, okay, how do we get, now we look at the drive times, et cetera, and say, how do we get close? How do we follow people on their commute?
Gotcha. Interesting. Fascinating. Okay, so we're at the 35-minute mark.
Okay.
We've asked all our questions. So I hope we have successfully teased everybody about this. As you can see, obviously this is a topic that deserves a full breakout session for people to get their insight knowledge built up. It is something that I found really fascinating. Like I said, Brian and I have been chit-chatting back and forth on the market in general. But when I met David last year, actually at our last dental leadership summit, so I'm a data guy myself. Like I love analytics. That this is what drives the vast majority of my decision making in the businesses that I run. So you're a man after my own heart, because I know I'm always wrong when I go emotional, right? Like I learned this the hard way. So I truly appreciate that. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time and giving me your insights and your core knowledge. For those of you who were on the fence as far as wanting to come to the summit, look, this in itself is a section and a segment that you need to participate in. Brian Mills is an absolute pro when it comes to your next real estate decision, and like I said, David's company is doing a lot of analytical works that the more I read about it, the more fascinated I am by it. Dental Leadership Summit is in Salt Lake City. We're at the Grand America Hotel, October 23rd to the 25th. Brian and David will be on stage on the 24th and running a breakout session. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I very much appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Ralph. It's an honor to
Thanks,
be
Ralph.
here. Appreciate it.
You too.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you, man.